prefer to not stand behind the lectern, it's a bit more personal. So, yeah, I'm going to present, are we starting the timer? Good to go, go. So I'm going to present the motion that I think we will not meet net zero. My name's Finlay Asher. I'm part of this group called Safe Landing. I'm a mechanical / aerospace engineer by trade. I've spent 8 years at Rolls-Royce working on aircraft engine design, specifically on future programs and looking at future concepts. And I'm now co-founder of this group called Safe Landing, which is a group for climate-concerned aviation workers. We think that rapid climate action is very consistent with secure, stable employment into the future, and we are actively pushing our industry to do more within it. We're a group of pilots, engineers, cabin crew, airport workers, factory workers, air traffic controllers, etc. Lots of people in the UK, lots of people all around the world there. So check out our website, and my email address is there as well. So, this is quite dramatic, right? I'm saying I think aviation is heading for a crash. And I really want to alarm people here. I think something really serious is happening. I think we've got a massive risk on our hands, and I think we need to take it very, very seriously and examine all options to prevent that. Because in the aviation industry, safety should be our #1 priority. So, what's happening? Well, we're having a massive increase in global emissions over the last 50 years. This is the aviation sector. This is all that matters, is carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere each year, which has been going up and up. And in fact, prior to COVID, we're seeing a 5% growth per year of CO2 emissions, very much going in the wrong trajectory. What our group is saying is we need to set a new trajectory, completely change course, and set a new flight path towards a safer future where we can land and take off again and continue to fly into the future. So, if you think of our atmosphere like a bucket, and we're filling it with greenhouse gases, we've got a certain carbon budget, and if we go above that budget, we fill the bucket with too much greenhouse gas. I was hoping to have an animation there. Well, so we've been filling up the bucket for the past sort of 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, and on our current trajectory, with our current CO2 emissions, we've only got about 8% of that budget left, or less than 10 years. So really the context here is that the next 10 years are vital. It doesn't matter about 2040, 2050, if we don't take action this decade. Okay? Now, it's not about future impacts here. 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater this year. We had major droughts in Africa and China with massive economic impacts in the billions or trillions. That is the cost of inaction this decade as well. This is an emergency. Okay, if we, as aviation workers, as a pilot in an aircraft, if you see a warning sign, you're trained to not ignore it. Even if you've got unconscious biases, it's uncomfortable to acknowledge the emergency and to take action. It's very important that you look at well, firstly, you don't try and dismiss it, you tackle it head on, you look at the various options, you go through it with a clear mind, presenting clear evidence, and also you give yourself a backup plan. A plan A, a plan B, a plan C that you can execute. You don't just put all your eggs in one basket. So, sustainable aviation, at the moment, the industry presents a kind of playbook to justify future growth of air traffic. And I'm going to talk you through that right now, because it's what I spend a lot of my time addressing and trying to talk people through. So the first thing is to play down the size of the problem. We've heard today a few times, if you were here, aviation is only 2 or 3% of global CO2. That's tiny. Well, actually, the first thing is that the UK is 1% of global CO2 emissions, and that's something we shouldn't take action in the UK. 2% is bigger than the UK, Brazil, Mexico. It's not that we don't need to do anything in these countries. It's a cumulative problem, and it's a sum of everything. The next problem is the projected growth of air traffic and emissions mean that we're likely to consume about 1/4 of the budget by 2050. And this is ignoring non-CO2 emissions as well. And the industry, we've known about this since the 1990s, and we've continued to neglect it, play up the uncertainty, and not take action, which is leading to additional impacts. So the latest science says that non-CO2 is actually 2/3 of aviation's climate impact. So maybe we need to reduce any budget by 2/3. Maybe we've only got a few years, we don't have 10 years. Okay, and at the moment, non-CO2, we don't measure it, we don't account for it in any policy, we don't mitigate it. There's a couple of trials, but there's nothing that legislates airlines in any way to do anything about non-CO2 at the moment, and the industry is actively delaying that as well, which is dangerous. So there's tend to be sort of 5 different types of greenwash that's put forward to kind of not look at the growth issue. The first is aircraft efficiency. That's what I was working on. We've already seen that the growth of air traffic massively outweighs the rate of efficiency improvements, and in fact, more efficient aircraft, it's cheaper to fly, more people fly. Electric flight and hydrogen as well. We've seen the timescales there, but also just the range and capacity of these aircraft mean that they're not going to decarbonise a major chunk of CO2 emissions anytime in the next couple of decades. It doesn't meet the this decade test. Alternative jet fuels, sustainable aviation fuels, the big issue is lack of resource, lack of global resource, and also competing demands for that resource, which means we can't keep on burning jet fuel in the quantities we're doing now. There needs to be a reduction, and that means we need air traffic degrowth. Finally, you've got carbon offsets, and I kind of put the negative emissions in this. This is about making it not our problem but someone else's, pay for somebody else, somewhere else, sometime else, to sort this out in the future, which is very dangerous because it delays the issue. There's big issues with verification, permanence of these things, and at the moment, these offsets are just far too cheap and they don't have any material impact on actually reducing emissions. So, you've seen this graph a couple of times today. You've probably seen it lots of times in industry roadmaps. There's a bunch of aspects to this: technology efficiency improvements, alternative fuels. This is the industry's most optimistic line of what it can do with alternative fuels technology and offsets. But there's a big area under this graph, and the area under the curve is what's important. And we will blow our budget for 1.5 degrees C within the next 10 years, and will massively overrun our budget, giving a massive social and economic injustice to future generations, even if they can fix it with negative emissions. So this kind of underpins what I'm saying here. It doesn't matter what happens in 2050, it matters whether we blow the budget or not, and we have about 10 years to do it, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, the industry wants to get back on this business as usual growth trajectory of air traffic. What I'm saying is that could lead to a massive industry crash once we understand we just don't have the resource, and the resource is far too expensive compared to now if we're planning for untaxed, subsidised jet fuel. What we're saying is maybe we need to fly less in the short term in order to preserve the ability to fly more into the future, and to continue to be able to enjoy the benefits that aviation has. What we don't want to do is build in overcapacity in terms of our airports and airlines, make a massive investment, then become stranded, meaning we have a massive loss of investor money and major cuts to our workforce, which you've seen what happened during COVID, quite precarious, particularly in airports, and we've really got to be concerned about those workers and not have a repeat of that. So, why is the industry not doing anything about it? Well, I kind of present you this analysis. If you're a political leader or a business leader, you tend to have a few years in office as a CEO or as a politician. Particularly if you're a CEO, you're thinking about quarterly profits, share price, maximising growth in the long term, minimising cost, minimising R&D, minimising headcount in order to look good to investors. The problem is these people won't be here in 2030. They might be, but they're quite unlikely to be here. The climate crisis is going to get really bad in 10 to 15 years. I want to have a career in the industry for 20 to 40 years. It matters to me if there's a massive crash in the 2030s. Leaders, though, do not prioritise long-term stability in favour of short-term gain. And that's why we need to kind of recognise this time horizon here. So basically there's if we don't need technology, what do we need? Well, we do need technology, but we're lacking the policy to drive the technology and also to drive the behaviour. The only thing we've got is the ICAO's CORSIA scheme in international aviation. This covers the majority of aviation emissions, and the CORSIA scheme was kind of ratified last month. We think there's massive issues with this scheme and we need to overturn it and have something much better, completely reform it. We think it basically gives zero accountability to airlines. There is no carbon budget, which is fundamental to climate science. There's zero limits on CO2 emissions, you just offset if you produce more. There's zero action on non-CO2, which has a massive impact. There's no tax on jet fuel. There's no consideration of frequent flyer levy or limits on air traffic growth. So there's zero chance of preventing an industry crash. Okay, this is very stark, this is very serious for our careers and our industry. We need to do something about it. So what is that? Well, our group, we've come up with this idea of aviation workers' climate assembly, where workers are given the time, the space and the expert evidence to go through this and to design our own vision for the future of our industry that is compatible with climate science. Yeah, so basically this is our website, this is the page that describes the climate assembly. You've got a 2-minute promotional video, and that's me. Thank you and sorry for overrunning.